Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 121, The Quest for Perfection and Behind the Word. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today I will discuss the quest for perfection and behind the word. These are concepts I came up with. The quest for perfection, I will describe the quest for perfection in detail and some problems that may arise along the way. And behind the word, here I look at semantics in general. What meanings we associate with words, how strongly we feel these meanings, and related concepts. So, now off we go on the quest for perfection. Well, in all the many episodes I have done for the Casey Waters Show, this is the first time I'm doing the quest for perfection, although I probably touched on it many times. The quest for perfection, well, could be a troublesome concept for us. Then again, it could be a wonderful concept for us. For here is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. It could help us, but then again, it could hurt us. We have to be aware of this phenomenon that's associated with the quest for perfection. Well, why could perfection get us into trouble? Well, it could happen probably for any myriad of reasons. I'm sure there's many things that could go wrong with the quest for perfection. I guess one of the obvious things that could go wrong is if we have someone oppressing us, insisting that we be perfect, and that is the basis of our quest for perfection, is to satisfy this person. This could be our boss, our teacher, our parent, or other people who set us down this path of perfection, which somehow we must pursue. And often it is not a lot of fun. Often there is undue pressure here. And often there is, sandbagging or interference from our competitors. We think we're doing fine, and perhaps we are, until one of our competitors interferes with us. Oh well, a horrible phenomenon indeed, and I'm assuming a widespread phenomenon, unfortunately. Perhaps we could take steps to reduce all this, and being honest with our competitors, and taking steps to level the playing field. So our quest for perfection goes on. Well, it could go awry in another way too. Well, we could have someone, telling us we have to be perfect. And when this happens, sometimes it's for our own good. And sometimes when we become perfect, it will really help us in many ways. And other times, the victory might be a little more hollow. So we have to be aware of this. A lot of it depends on, how the perfection is accomplished and in what area it is. Anyway, what about, manic depressive people and their quest for perfection? Well, then it's self-imposed. As the person rolls into the manic state, all pumped up and excited about the quest for perfection at hand. Quickly, he or she makes wonderful advances, and the goal is almost in sight. When, for any number of reasons, perhaps it's been too long in the manic phase, and perhaps we got tired, and this caused us to have an error, or perhaps someone interfered with the process, creating an error. Somehow a mistake creeps up. Suddenly we beat ourselves up over this and become incredibly depressed over it. We keep emphasizing our mistake to ourselves over and over again, making it worse than it really is. Then we're all depressed. Then we can't hardly function, let alone our quest for perfection. Oh well, it is difficult. So we swing back and forth dealing with this. And so we are depressed until somehow we can inspire ourselves to resume the quest for perfection. Something has to inspire us. Perhaps a phone call, perhaps a visit from a friend, or perhaps just a nice day, or other factors could spur us on back into mania, back into the grind, into accelerated accomplishment on our way to the quest for perfection, until we make another error and beat ourselves up again and inflate the error and make it worse than it seems, sinking into a deep depression in which we could hardly function. The cycle repeats itself again and again. Many people suffer from this phenomenon. Some people are probably highly accomplished in their fields and still suffer. Others can hardly get going, and they suffer anyway. Their quest for perfection has just begun, and it keeps being cut short by their depression. Anyway, many things happen on the quest for perfection. We have to be aware of this. For instance, when you're doing the perfect whatever, if you're an athlete running the perfect race, or a rock star singing the perfect song, you're at your zenith of your career. Well, several things probably typically could happen here. See, we always see it from the outside in. We look at it from the point of view of the commentator raving on your performance. But what about your perspective? You see all the details. Well, perhaps it's not as perfect as you would have liked. Perhaps there's a few errors in your performance. Somehow the commentators didn't see them or glossed them over. You got rave reviews anyway, and everybody loves you. Then again, it could be the opposite. You could think that you couldn't quite do it, but for some miracle, some stroke of luck, you're able to pull it off perfectly somehow. And thus you are really perfect in your accomplishment. So in other words, perfection isn't always perfection. Sometimes you do something and suddenly you're a lot better at it than you realize. Luck and skill are on your side. Other times you might fall short and make a few mistakes, but other people might overlook them and claim you're perfect anyway. So we're dealing with all of this. Well, now I'm going to take a little side note to deal with the viewer comment. I guess I got this viewer comment a few months ago. Anyway, someone was upset by my voice, thinking I'm too sarcastic. Well, sarcasm and dry wit are typically not used on the Casey Waters Show. They are only employed sporadically. Of course, my voice may sound otherwise, and if so, I apologize for it. This is probably in part due to my autistic nature. Remember, I have autism. It crept up early in my life, and I've been dealing with it for my whole life. Things got much better after 9 years old or so. Before then, I was more autistic, more wrapped up into my own world. As I went through my teenage years and into my 20s, things slowly improved further still. But I'm not there yet. I still retain some of my autism, basically by choice, a decision I made a long time ago. Well, anyway, why? Well, I guess I felt that I would have more options and be more flexible and be able to deal with change better that way, retaining my autism and my sense of independent judgment. Anyway, let's get back to this quest for perfection here. So we could have a person oppressing you, trying to get you to be perfect, and this may be for the good or for bad. This varies considerably. Then you have the manic depressive person and their quest for perfection. And then I guess you have many other sorts of quests for perfection. Just you doing it on your own initiative. Yet you're not manic depressive. You're just gonna try to be perfect anyway. Well, sure, this makes a lot of sense, especially with the economy being down. It's good to have a skill. You gotta be able to do something, but just be prepared for the competition. Anyway, also, keep a multi-level vision perspective on things. What I mean by that is there's many ways to see a situation. It's not just the one judgment, the one viewpoint, whether it is yours or whether it be that of the judge or your parent or your teacher or your boss. Well, sure, their verdict has a lot of weight, but it is not the only verdict. There are many other perspectives that they might not be factoring in, that you might not be factoring in. Just keep this in mind. Always hold on to this notion. It is useful in problem solving to see things from many different angles, even if some of those angles aren't even from a human point of view, perhaps from an animal point of view, or from an abstract point of view. This is where my autism might come into play, where I might have a slight advantage, for I don't conform as readily to things. But anyway, so there are other things going on too. One thing to remember is try to keep the quest personal. This is your quest for perfection, not somebody else's, even if you're being forced into doing it by your parent or a teacher or a coach or whoever. If this is what you want to do, and or you feel it is what's best for you anyway, well, as a general rule, it's best to succumb to their judgment and take it on the quest. But personalize it. Let it be your quest and not their quest. And that way you could do it a little more your way and have your enthusiasm into it. A critical ingredient that can help you accomplish true perfection and perhaps break the mold and go beyond the expectations of your teacher or coach or parent as you take the quest personally instead of having it imposed on you. Remember, this is a good strategy when the quest is a benevolent one. Well, of course, you might be forced to do something perfect for something that is not really a good cause. Well, this is an unfortunate situation, and I guess it is best to take whatever careful measures you can to get out of the situation. Unfortunately, things like this might become a little more widespread in the future. That is, when we are encouraged to undertake somebody else's quest for perfection, and perhaps we might not always agree with it. Well, maybe it will be like that more in the future, but hopefully not. Time will tell. But now let's move along and leave the quest for perfection behind as we jump into behind the word. Here I go into semantics, the meaning behind words. Gee, this is such a basic concept. It was probably taught to you when you were young, probably by your parents, your brothers and sisters, friends, and teachers, especially in your younger years. Let's say kindergarten through 6th grade. Anyway, so you get a handle on all these things, and you develop them, and you develop your vocabulary, and you develop your experience over years. And as the years drag on, year after year, it adds to your layers of experience, and words start to have many more meanings, many more shades to them. For the shades represents your own experience. Sure, that you have dealt with these situations. Why am I even discussing this? Gee, this seems a little boring. I know. Well, hold on. The reason I'm discussing this is because it varies. I'm assuming tremendously from individual to individual as to how seriously he or she might take some of these words and how big of an impact they really have on their lives. The words, the experience. Remember, I'm trying to tie them all up here and make them one and the same. Sure. So, you experience things, and there are words to describe them. Of course, sometimes you need to do the opposite and pull the word away from the experience, keeping in mind that everybody experiences things differently. And where one word might represent an incredibly upsetting concept to you, to another person it might represent a neutral concept or even a positive one, because of their experiences and due to variations in meanings of words. Keep all that in mind. So we have our variable experiences, which cause us to see different words differently and associate different meanings with them. But we have to take a few other things into account here too. For it's not just words and experiences that might have some variation and might make life tricky and difficult to interpret or understand occasionally. There's a few other concepts too, or at least a couple of them I could think of. One of them is you could look at life from different perspectives. Now we could get arbitrary here. Remember, it's not just your experience that causes you to have variations in your life. It's also how you see things. And some people take things more seriously than others. And sometimes you got to either take something more seriously or less seriously to help you be able to survive the situation and get by through it. If you got to do something you really think is a joke, well, perhaps you need to take it a little more seriously. If some situation is crushing you because it's so awful and oppressive and making you depressed, perhaps you need to take it a little more lightly. Sure. But there's other things too. For beyond that, the variability of how we see things and how seriously we take things, there is arbitrary concepts we could throw in. Here we go. For instance, there's the arbitrary concept that you are the center of everything. You can be like the center point, and everything flows out from you. And, well, in a sense, God sees the world through your eyes here. And this is true, of course it is, at least to some extent, but it applies to everybody, of course. So we're all the center of everything. But yet, that still carries a lot of meaning. Just because we all share in it, that doesn't necessarily dilute it. Well, why? Well, perhaps it's because it's related to another arbitrary concept here. This concept I came up with yesterday, before I did my prostrations. But anyway, the concept of ownership and ego. Sure. Well, the idea that you own everything. That you own your possessions, your clothes, your house, and all that. And your relationships. There is a cat fight going on nearby. Hopefully, they'll come out of it soon. We have our possessions and our relationships. They are all part of us. But hold on. Can we split off from ourselves? Perhaps we can. Well, at least in an arbitrary concept, we could assume suddenly that there's not one of us, but perhaps two of us. Perhaps even more. But let's simplify things. There are two of us. So I guess the way to look at it is it would be you or I, basically being the first person, the main part of yourself. But then there would be another part of yourself. And so it's a question of how to label things. I guess it's a little arbitrary here. I guess my gut feeling says the other person is in the third person. In other words, it's a he or a she. And the other aspect is the first person. It is the I. Well, to me, the he or she would be the possessor and the ego and the owner of everything. And somehow, split off from all of this is the real you, the I, which doesn't own a thing, and perhaps isn't even in these relationships. All the relationships, all the things that you do, the family you're associated with, the work you do, the place where you live, and all that good stuff, well, they're just, and where you go, and so on, that's just an extension of you, your experiences. That is all something that he or she does. Where the real you is just an arbitrary I, somehow behind all this. And you don't own any of it. Now, it gets real tricky here. Remember, this is an arbitrary concept. So I'm assuming that somehow the I behind the he and she of experience is associated with the he or she, but yet is removed from it as well. It is a difficult and complicated thing to explain. You betcha. I'll try to do the best I can. Can you get any closer than my perspective on this? Well, certainly you can. Perhaps talking to some people who know Buddhism and related concepts might be good. For the Buddhist believes that the ego is an illusion. You want to talk to someone who really believes that and who knows it from experience, through their meditation and religious studies. That's one angle to go at it. Is there another angle to approach to get a better perspective than mine? Well, sure, you could read about it too. Is there another perspective? Why, yeah, there is. You could get a better handle on this than I could, perhaps if you have multiple personalities. Then you might be able to. Perhaps then, dealing with your different identities and how they are related to one another. Sure, I am being serious here. They might have a handle on this, a handle on our real identity. So I say it's an arbitrary distinction that we break ourselves into two. But perhaps it's not that arbitrary. Remember, Buddhists and I guess several other religions believe that the ego is an illusion, that there is no ego, no self, no possessor. You don't own anything. It's just an illusion, your separate identity. Well, if that's the case, well then what's behind it? What is the real you? Well, it's hard to get to the real you because you're always caught up in your ego. And you think that's the real you. So it's a real difficult problem. Well, that's why I say split it up. At least in an arbitrary sense, just temporarily, so you could get a handle on this. So you can think what's behind the you. Well, instead of one you, there's two yous. There's the you of experience, the you that owns everything, the you of your ego, and then there's the you that's behind that, that's somehow related to you. And this you that's behind it, of course, is related to everybody else and to God. Tying into that phenomenon of being related to everyone else and being everyone else and being God, that phenomenon is much stronger and holds, well, probably predominates in a sense on this other self, the other self that's removed from yourself, the other self that is not the ego. Gee, I know this is all complicated. Don't give up. Keep trying to come back to this concept. Gee, I know it's difficult to understand and comprehend. Sure it is. But that doesn't mean it isn't true or that it isn't real. The ego is an illusion. Well, then time is an illusion too. And space, it's all an illusion, for we are a different reality. We are separate from ourselves, yet related to ourselves. Perhaps we'll find out more about this relationship in the future between ourself and our other self, who is part of God in a sense, or at least associated with God, and that goes beyond time and place. That aspect of ourselves. If we could tap into it, we could probably do many things, at least experience many things, and perhaps know many things too. Of course, bringing that knowledge back from one self to the normal ego self is probably almost impossible.
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, kc121s2@kc121s.com.